to Monetary Choice video. I wanted to show you the impact of the new dollars that have been added to the sort of monetary system during the past 4 years, and how that sort of explains to us the sort of dramatic rise in economic activity and now the coming recession. This data is based upon what's called M2. It's an amount of money in the system. It's released by Federal Reserve. So let's get on with it. But basically, in a nutshell, I'm going to show you just like this orange line shows how much money has been added to the system over the course of 4 years. And as you can see, it dramatically rose, and now it's dramatically fallen. So where it used to be over here in 2019, it's back to that level. So whatever companies were gearing up to produce for during this spike, they've now have factories with no buyers, no buyers for whatever they thought they were going to sell. Like, they saw this rise dramatically. They hired more people, they built more factories, they produced more goods, and now suddenly the floor has dropped out from the economic activity and gone back to where it was. And it's actually even worse, but that's for another video. So let's dive into, so the key is, how is that helpful? Like, if you're running a business and you're wondering, like, if the past 2 years are going to be like the next 2 years, no, that's not the case, at least based upon the amount of money that's being added to the system right now. So this is sort of a means to forecast what's going to happen and review what has happened. So what do we have here? We have the blue line. Let's look at that. The blue chart is based upon the left-hand axis. And overall, you could see the title here, new US dollars added from 2018 to 2022. We've got two lines, the monthly increase, and the orange is the running 12 months total of increases. So let's look at the blue bars first. The blue bars are based on the left axis. So this is the amount of new money that was added in per month. So back in 2018, if we look over here, this is in billions. It was about, let's say, 50 billion, 70 billion, practically nothing. And then it started rising. You can see here during 2019 to about, let's say, an average of 100 billion per month. And then you can see when the COVID situation hit, the amount of new money just skyrocketed. Why did it skyrocket? Well, one of the biggest reasons is the government started ramping up deficit spending. And deficit spending, the government doesn't, deficit spending means the government is spending more than it takes in. And so where does it get that money? It goes to Federal Reserve. Federal Reserve creates the money and buys government bonds, which is just another way of giving government money. So that's what happened. Deficit spending dramatically rose right here. There's probably a few bills that were part of this. But back to the actual stats, you can see that it was about it was about 50 billion here, 100 billion during 2019, and then suddenly it went up to, really, this is $1 trillion, 1,000 billion. So it went up 10 times in 1 month. That's how much they produced. And then the next month it was about the same. So just huge increases in dollars entering the economy, first going to government and then going to government contractors, and then contractors to the next, and goes down the line. So the first companies that benefit are the government contractors, and then sort of support the vendors that support those contractors, and then the money that those people make and spend elsewhere. So that was so it increased throughout 2020, 2021. It was still very high compared to 2019, and now we see what's been happening. It's actually negative. So what does that mean? They're actually reducing. What does that mean? This is the amount of new money added. This is the amount of money being taken out of the system. And the way that's done is basically when the government pays back a bond, right? Because the Federal Reserve, quote unquote, like in a way, not really, but lent the money to the government. So the government pays it back, and then Federal Reserve has two options. They could lend it out again, buy more bonds, or they could just retire the money and get rid of it. Like, they create it over here, and this is where they just get rid of it. So what does that mean? It means money's being taken out. So it's the exact opposite of the prior, 3 years. Okay, so, but really the orange line really tells the story, because the orange line, what I thought would be helpful is to look at the running total of the past 12 months of monthly increases. So that's why the orange line, which is, so it's based on the right-hand axis, and this is in trillions. So, this one goes to 1,200 billion. This one goes to 6 trillion. So over here we see, it's 12 months average. So it's going to start after 12 months. And so we can see during the prior 12 months, about $500 billion had been added, new dollars, right, had been added to the economy. $500 billion. So this is new. And then suddenly overall during 2020, it jumped to 1 trillion, which was higher than it had been. So, businesses started seeing more demand. And then suddenly it just went through the roof. It was like suddenly we had at one point, $3 extra trillion in the economy, and then at one point $4 extra trillion in the economy. So, like, what's a business seeing? They're just selling cars, they're selling Pelotons, they're selling everything. They're selling ad space, just unprecedented amount of economic activity. And then so business owners are thinking, oh my God, look at all this demand. And they're not looking at what the cause of the demand is, because it's not really sustainable, which I can get to in a moment. But they see all this demand, they start building new factories, producing more goods, hiring more people. And then it starts going down a little bit, but it's still very high. I mean, it was just an extra $500 billion in the economy, and then suddenly it's 4 and then 2, and now things start basically cutting to the chase. It's back to back to the way it was, which really isn't normal, but back to the way it was. And so that means, as I said at the beginning, that all these factories that were built where they were expecting, potentially some businesses probably expected the line to keep going up like this. And I'm sort of assuming that this line mimics, or that business earnings mimic what this line is showing us. So they're seeing sales dramatically rise. They're building more factories, hiring more people, and now suddenly it's back to where it was. And that's why right now we are seeing daily layoffs, right? Because there's not this extra spending. So any people they had hired during these past 2 years are no longer needed, at least in certain sectors, right? And so that's why it's dramatically going down, and it is going down. And now you can see it's like almost negative. So we'll see if even this orange line becomes less than it even was. But overall, I hope this is helpful. I mean, what's my recommendation? Watch more of these videos that I make. Follow me on YouTube, right? And click the like button. That helps as well. But you can check this yourself. I mean, just type in M2, like M as in Mary, 2, Federal Reserve, and you can see the chart of how much money Federal Reserve is adding or removing from the system. So you can just check that out regularly, incorporate that into your business planning. You can predict increases, right? Like anyone could have predicted like this high point. They would just look at the monthly increases during the prior 12 months. So you can predict increases and produce accordingly, and you can predict decreases and decrease accordingly. Some conservative businesses could have just ignored all this to a certain extent. What happens is that businesses that are booming hire people away from the businesses that are not increasing production. But anyway, I hope this helps. That's enough for now, and good planning. I mean, and I do want to come back to what's the cause of all this deficit spending. I mean, you see these massive bills. Where does the money come from? We can get into that in another video, but it's just created. That's the way the system works. And the downside is it produces sort of false demand, not sustainable demand. Because if they continued at this, they would have destroyed the currency. It would have been like many other countries that have destroyed their currencies and sort of like reset, back to whatever, some new level. But so they could have had hyperinflation, but instead they scaled it back. It's still incredibly harmful what they did to the currency and people's savings and retirements, because they basically just spent people's retirements during this period. Anytime you see a massive bill being passed, just know that it's going to have an effect on the economy. It's going to confuse people because it's not sustainable. And it leads to massive hiring, massive firing, people moving for no jobs to new jobs, uprooting their families, and then suddenly there's no job anymore. So it just causes confusion. What we really need is to have really no increases in money, but if there is going to be one, really just no increases in money. There's no need ever to increase it. The only reason it's increased is because the government wants to spend more than it taxes, and ultimately when it does this, it's just a hidden tax because our money becomes less valuable. So ultimately it's all a tax. So that's a lot of bad news, but hopefully this has given you a little more clarity about how the economy works. I mean, I'll make one last point is that they always say like, oh my God, the Federal Reserve didn't see, Federal Reserve didn't see inflation coming, or they didn't read it right. Like it's not true. I mean, they create inflation. This is it. They issue more money, and they know exactly how much they're issuing. So thankfully they've stopped and even reduced the quantity of money, because when that happens, actually our money becomes more valuable. Our earnings, our salaries become more valuable. So this helps savers when that happens.